It is not uncommon that within an artist, a turbulent background begins to reveal itself over time, whether it be in the interviews they agree to do for the media, or simply within the art itself. At times when their past unravels to their observers, it could potentially shine a completely different light on what they create. When it comes to having a member of nobility as a father, and one of his mistresses as a mother, being in love with making drawings since a young age, but having to watch her mother tear each one of them up, to then eventually being forcibly housebound for 25 years, it is undoubtedly evident that Italian-Canadian artist Sveva Caetani falls neatly into the category of an artist with a turbulent background. With one series of watercolour works released in 1989, titled Recapitulation, Sveva would reflect the story of her life in beautiful, abstract and mysterious ways. Each piece explores events that range from the brightest to the darkest experiences of her life, through surreal, dramatic imagery that exposes not only her amazing talent, but a profound and unique outlook on the world around her. But what was her story exactly? What could some of these strange and peculiar paintings reveal about her seemingly strange and peculiar background? Well, I'm someone who's forever falling into rabbit holes, so hopefully in this video we can find out together. I'd like to thank user Tosha Beans for suggesting the video topic for today. And as always, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comments. We got a fair bit to explore together here, so get comfortable and grab a beverage for this one. And on that point, before we get stuck in, I'd like to quickly thank and give a shout out to today's video sponsor, Athletic Greens, aka my new morning cup of coffee. Basically, for the longest time, I thought if I'm unable to have a coffee as soon as I wake up, there's just no way I can function. In other words, no matter how much a caffeinated drink may or may not agree with my sensitive stomach, I had to have it regardless, or I just can't get through the day. But that was before I started using Athletic Greens AG1 nutritional drink, which to me, so far, has been like finding a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. Except it's green. And good for you. Let me explain. Athletic Greens AG1 is a nutritional supplement that helps you improve not only your immune system and general health, but it also energizes you and gives you focus, making it an absolutely perfect and healthy substitute for caffeine. Each AG1 serving contains 75 ingredients, with components such as vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. Essentially everything a healthy gut needs on a daily basis. Every morning on an empty stomach, I start my day off with an AG1 drink, and the boost it gives me is so vitalizing and refreshing. Not to mention super simple to make. Just take a serving, add it to water, shake it all up, and bang, you got yourself a healthy, energizing drink with a great taste. Health and nutrition made simple is something you really don't see enough of nowadays. I couldn't recommend it enough. Please head to the first link in the description to find out more, and get yourself a whole 1 year supply of immune supporting vitamin D3K2 and 5 travel packs absolutely free with your first purchase. Thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring today's content, and with that said, welcome to another video, my friends. This is the story and artwork of Sveva Caetani. In order to fully understand the events that took place throughout Sveva Caetani's life, we first need to take a look at her father. This photograph is that of Leone Kaitani, a member of Italian family nobility, more specifically the House of Kaitani or Gaetani, originally from the city of Gaeta, just south of Rome. This family earned such wealth and notoriety due to the family playing crucial roles in Italian history over the generations, ever since medieval times. For example, the family would become practically the most important family in the city of Rome when a member named Benedetto Caitani was elected to the papacy as Pope Boniface VIII in 1294, whose reign would be notorious for his ruthlessness and nepotism. So much so it would prompt none other than Dante Alighieri to write about him being damned to the 8th layer of hell in his book titled Inferno within the Divine Comedy. As for Leone, born in 1869, he was a member of the Italian Parliament and a renowned scholar, particularly known for passionately studying Islam. He would even travel through the Middle East on many occasions, as well as many other countries around the globe, including Canada and the United States. He had as many as 17 different titles, some of which included the Prince of Tiano, the Duke of Sermonetta, and Prince Kaitani. Basically, he was a pretty big deal. Seemingly on the outside, a huge family with nearly infinite wealth and national reputation would seem practically unbreakable and carefree. However, there was an ominous threat watching from afar. By the time Pope Pius IX was elected as the new head of the Catholic Church in 1846, Leone's paternal father, Onorato, and his grandfather, Michelangelo, had fallen out of favour with the papacy and were not supporters of the election, perhaps mostly due to political and ideological differences. An interesting thing to note about Pius IX in terms of art is that he is known as the Pope that enforced a rather conservative law into how art should be represented. For example, he was responsible for the addition of fig leaves to historical statues throughout the country. The Kaitanis, on the other hand, were more left-leaning, which possibly may have contributed to the conflict between Pope Pius and the family. Regardless of the cause of this sour relationship, the legend goes that Pius had laid a curse on the family, swearing that, quote, "within 2 generations, there would be no more Kaitanis." Despite the fact that the family would simply dismiss this supposed curse, and although there are still a few cousins that exist today who bear the Kaitani surname, there are now no more Kaitanis in a direct line. In other words, this alleged curse did in some way come true, which will become clearer as to why as we continue further in this video. In the year 1900, an arranged marriage would be finalised between Leone Caetani and Vittoria Colonna, a member of another family of papal nobility from Naples. An important detail to note about this arranged marriage that puts it into quite a puzzling light is that for many generations these two families had constantly been feuding with each other. However, this would not be a Romeo and Juliet story of two lovers fighting to stay together despite their two warring families, as the relationship between Leone and Vittoria would be nothing short of a loveless one. It was no secret that they shared very little in common and had very different ambitions and interests. In fact, Vittoria would release a number of autobiographies throughout her life that would practically slam the Kaitani family at every given turn. However, they would eventually have a son by 1902 named Onorato after Leone's father, but who sadly would only live till 1948 due to health complications and disabilities that developed after contracting measles in his childhood. And by 1910, Leone and Vittoria were completely estranged, living separately from each other. It would be approximately 3 years later that Leone would begin an affair in Rome with an Italian singer and dancer named Ophelia Fabiani, who would later be the mother to Leone's illegitimate daughter, who they named Sveva. By 1917, the year that Sveva was born, and when Leone had succeeded his father as Prince of Tiano and Duke of Sermonetta, it was also during the height of World War I, and the impacts of a war deeply affected him by this time, to the point where he was beginning to distance himself further from his duties in society. Matters would only be made worse by the forbidden relationship between him and Ophelia with their newborn daughter, living together practically in seclusion from the outside world in their newly built villa in Rome. As this huge scandal continued, so did Leone's contentment for his life in Italian society in general. It certainly didn't help that there was a pandemic of the Spanish flu during this time, and the fact that an openly socialist aristocrat like Leone was now seeing a noticeable rise in fascism throughout Italy, along with Benito Mussolini now on the verge of rising to power by 1919. And so, by 1921, Leone would finally make the drastic, conscious decision to give up his land, his properties, his duties, his privileges, and his titles. In the middle of the night, he, Ophelia, and young Sveva left practically everything behind in pursuit of what would later be proven to be an ultimately impossible new life. Sveva Caetani would spend the first 5 years of her life with Leone and Ophelia Fabiani in their villa in Rome, bearing her mother's surname as prescribed by Italian law at the time. It would not be until Leone made the decision to abandon his life and his country by fleeing to Canada with her and Ophelia in 1921 that he would later be able to formally adopt Sveva, and in doing so, her name would later be changed to Kaitani. With over 30 trunks of belongings, they arrived in the city of Vernon in British Columbia, where Leone had purchased a late 19th century wood house in the neighbourhood of East Hill for approximately $7,000 cash, roughly $100,000 in today's money. Throughout the 1920s, during the majority of Sveva's childhood, she and her family would travel very frequently around Canada, America, and the rest of the world, from Europe to Japan. Although Leone had given up much of his wealth, the young family still had servants and a moderately upper-class farmer's lifestyle. Things couldn't have looked more hopeful and happy for the future, except it wasn't to last. Now, without his family's wealth, Leone was now a Canadian citizen, earning his fortune by investing heavily into the American stock market. And if we know anything about how things ended up in the American stock market by 1929, you probably know where this is going. The Wall Street crash of 1929 would ignite absolutely devastating effects to America's economy and, of course, to Leone's wealth. Things would go from bad to worse when roughly around this time, Sveva, like her half-brother, would also contract measles. This, accompanied with the family's rapidly diminishing wealth, would take Sveva out of her expensive girls' boarding school, to which Sveva would never return to. By the time the 1930s began, ill fortune and health problems would begin to spread within the family, as during this period we'd also see a decline in health for Leone, who was now fighting a losing battle with throat cancer. This postcard, showing a photograph of Leone sitting in bed, dated in 1934, just 1 year before his death, displays a touching and poignant moment between him and his daughter Sveva during the Christmas period of that year. The message reads, quote, "Sweet, darling Sveva, here is your father on his bed of torture. Happy Christmas. Sorry not to be with you. Your adoring father." End quote. Rather shockingly, it would actually be on Christmas Day the following year, December 25th, 1935, that Leone sadly passed away at the age of 66. A tragic loss this may have been to a now 17-year-old Sveva, but nothing could have predicted the strange and dark turn of events that now lay ahead of her, at the hands of the last living person that was close to her own mother, Ophelia. The death of Leone would naturally deeply wound the young teenage Sveva. However, the effect it had on her mother Ophelia was completely devastating. Not only did any fortunes that Leone had left around his death subsequently run dry, forcing Ophelia to later sell her jewellery at times to survive, but he was essentially the pillar of the family and the glue that kept them together. The loss of her husband and father to her daughter began to deeply affect her mental health. It should be noted that despite how much Leone loved Ophelia, the rest of the Kaitani family would not feel the same way about her at all. Despite a slim chance that relatives of the Kaitani estate would accept Sveva, there was no practical way after all that had happened that they would accept the woman that Leone abandoned everything for. So the idea for Sveva and her mother to cut their losses in Canada and go back to Italy after Leone had died seemed unlikely, and by the time World War II had broken out in Europe not long after, returning to their former country was simply not an option. As time went by since the loss of her husband, Ophelia's behaviour and mental state became increasingly erratic. She began cutting off all social ties to the outside world, allowing only her closest lifelong friends to visit on rare occasions, persistently isolating not only herself, but also her 17-year-old daughter Sveva. After the death of her father, she was effectively kept prisoner in her own home, with her mother forbidding any of Sveva's friends to even visit. Now, without Leone to hold on to, Ophelia chose to hold on to her daughter. According to one article I came across, Ophelia reportedly complained of heart problems, using her health as a means to manipulate her daughter, to the point where Ophelia even said to her one day, quote, "If you leave me, I shall die." Sveva had no choice but to obey. This lonely existence would continue for a further 25 years, from 1935 up until Ophelia's death in 1960. Within the first 4 years, Sveva was not even allowed to leave the front door. Imagine this for a moment. It's hard to think of absolute isolation in a modern day household, what with radio, the internet, TV, telephones and so on. But imagine a time before all these things. Hardly any stimulus, virtually no communication to the outside world whatsoever. Not even any natural daylight for 4 years straight. It's unsurprising that this would eventually lead to Sveva suffering from a nervous breakdown, to which a doctor had to intervene and advise that she at least leave the house for exercise and fresh air, resulting in Ophelia eventually allowing Sveva out on the grounds of a house at the very least. But even with this relief, life for Sveva would be nothing short of servitude. Her mother was now showing classic symptoms of OCD. She became so obsessed with cleanliness in the house that she removed all curtains, window coverings, lampshades, carpets, or anything at all that could collect dust or dirt. Considering their isolation and the size of a house, Sveva's share of the chores was practically around the clock. Every day for 25 years of her life, Sveva dusted, scrubbed the floors, washed and ironed the sheets, with only her unstable mother for company. Sveva would later tell stories in her obituary how at night, Ophelia would frequently demand that her daughter sleep next to her, until one day Sveva rebelled, dragging and throwing her mattress out of her mother's room into the hallway. Before her father died, Sveva regularly loved to paint and draw, and longed to continue exploring a creative pastime, but Ophelia firmly forbade it, allegedly tearing up any drawings of Sveva's that she would come across. On occasion, Sveva would draw and paint on very small bits of paper that she could hide from Ophelia, but whenever she was caught, she would be severely punished. Writing was also forbidden, including writing or receiving letters, and even what books Sveva was allowed to read were heavily dictated by her mother. Sveva was restricted only to books within her father's library, or those that were occasionally sent by her aunt. Apart from the windows of her own house, Sveva's books were her only way of seeing the outside world, and practically any form of self-expression was not allowed within the household. Another slight ounce of freedom would be granted to Sveva after 16 years of being confined to the property, when she was finally allowed to go into the town to do business such as banking or shopping. However, a close companion of Ophelia from Denmark known as Miss Jewel would constantly be escorting her, and Sveva had to telephone her mother every 30 minutes. And that was the life of Sveva Caetani for the entirety of her young adulthood. Sveva would be 43 years old when her mother Ophelia eventually died at the age of 63 in 1960. For the very first time, Sveva would have to find her way on her own. She was now well and truly free, but the world had never appeared more daunting. Ophelia had left practically nothing in her will for her daughter, giving the last of her possessions, a house in Italy, to the Catholic Church. The situation was clear. Sveva had to find a job and earn a living for the first time in her life. It must be said though that Sveva showed incredible courage and determination to reconnect with the community around her, taking every new opportunity in her stride. She quickly learned to drive, she joined local clubs, and she made many new friends. Although Sveva had lived for so long in isolation, it did not hinder the fact that she was well educated and fluent in as many as 4 different languages, which unsurprisingly helped her greatly in landing herself a job as a French school teacher at St. James Catholic Elementary School in Vernon. By 1965, she enrolled at the University of Victoria with help from her friends to obtain her teaching certificate in 1972. Many of her students would later state how much of a beloved and inspiring mentor she was throughout her teaching career. Sveva had seemingly turned over a new leaf to discover infinite possibilities. Things could not look more positive for the future, but one thing was still missing. Although she had started extensively writing again, regularly writing prose and poetry, her creative urges were still not completely quenched, as she was still yet to pick up a paintbrush once again. It would, in fact, be whilst attending Victoria University that Sveva would meet an art teacher during a time when Sveva had an epiphany to not only paint again, but to tell her story through a large series of paintings. Perhaps Sveva also craved for a therapeutic outlet for her painful memories of her father's death, her mother's control over her, and her own confinement and solitude. And so, the art teacher would encourage her to paint once more. In between teaching from 1978 up until 1989, Sveva would silently and meticulously work on a series of 47 paintings, comprising of 56 individual pieces, that would later be known as the Recapitulation series. A collection of colourful, dreamlike images, some as big as 6 foot tall, which not only reflect nearly 25 years of experiences, but offers us a front row seat view of what lay hidden within the deepest corners of Sveva's mind. Now imagine for a moment being forbidden to express yourself creatively for 25 years straight, having to keep each moment of inspiration suppressed and locked behind you. And now all of a sudden, you have the freedom to do practically whatever you want. No more hiding tiny drawings away from prying eyes, no more strict schedules, but a whole wide world of opportunities now lay at Sveva's feet. It should come to little surprise that Sveva would completely devote herself to her rekindled hobby. She would purchase watercolour paints, and practically from the very start, she would paint on huge surfaces, each finished piece as elaborate as the last. Her watercolour technique alone is very impressive, more akin to that of acrylic or oil paints. Her imagery is allegorical, surreal, and even disturbing at times. However, Sveva was equally as talented in invoking a sense of tranquility and reverence in her work. And although it may have taken us a little while to get here, it's now time to look at some of these mysterious, otherworldly paintings together, and to get a better understanding of what this series represents. I should also note, however, that simply for time's sake, lack of solid information, and the fact that some of these works only have very low resolution photos available, I unfortunately won't be able to discuss every single painting in this series, but I will be referencing directly from the official Kaitani Center website for most of them, which I've left a link for in the description below, should you wish to go on a journey through the entire series for yourself. Let's start this deep dive by looking at the painting titled The Bell Tower, featuring a dramatic looking mountain range with its peaks caught in the glow of the rising or setting sun. If you look closely, a very slight black outline of an ancient Roman tower can be seen in the middle, with what appears to be the ghostly white outlines of train carriages heading right towards it. Towards the bottom of this mysterious imagery is the sight of an equally ghostly and mysterious pale figure overlooking this strange scene. According to Kaitani.org, the pale white human figure at the bottom is Sveva herself, pondering on the journey ahead of her. This painting serves as an image to beckon the viewer to follow the narrative, to board this train of mystery and join her on an adventure to the unknown, essentially being the first introductory chapter to her Recapitulation series. As we already know, Sveva was not only passionate about painting, but she also adored literature, which leads us to an interesting pattern you may begin to notice in this series as we continue to look at these paintings. Remember a while ago I mentioned the family's history and connection to Dante Alighieri's book The Divine Comedy? Well, Sveva would make it clear that her parents would never allow their daughter to distance herself from her origins and the significance of her ancestral history, despite the new life they try to build in Vernon, Canada. This would be made evident in this series, as Sveva would take inspiration from a Divine Comedy with her own personal touch. Instead of being guided through hell, purgatory and heaven by an ancient Roman poet like Virgil, she would be guided by her own father through the chapters of her own life. As described by the Kaitani Center website, quote, "While loosely based on Dante's The Divine Comedy, Sveva plays with personal interpretations of the work, adding her own influences, memories, philosophies, and entirely new sections that transcended its original structure and portray her own spiritual and intellectual beliefs, much as Dante himself had done with the beliefs of his own time." End quote. This brings us neatly to the next painting in the series I'd like to discuss, called The Summons. To quote the description of this piece, as provided by the Kaitani Center, quote, "Before the facade of a church, inspired by the iconic Italian churches, the Church of Gesù and the Santa Maria Novella, a recollection, a summons, and the beginning of an epic journey are taking place." From left to right, Sveva recalls a relationship with her father, describing the tree of blood they shared as a backdrop to their early relationship, and her pain is the death represented as the raw form in their later relationship. At the far right, his spirit emerges to reunite with the artist and to guide her, as Virgil did through the reimagining of the spiritual toils of Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. It is through the entrance to the 15th century Italian church that their journey through hell begins, thus portraying the start of a recollected timeline of the artist's life that began in Rome, surrounded by such architecture. This sense of time lent by the superimposed subjects upon the scene introduces the narrative sensibility that will continue to inform the series, while also portraying a connection between the act of remembering and transcendence. End quote. This next painting in the series is titled Entrance by Coatlicue. This time we're interestingly presented with a more ancient South American theme from Sveva in this work. Again, as described on the website, quote, "Presented in this painting is a formidable statue of the Aztec Earth Mother Goddess, Coatlicue, standing at the gates of hell. The name translating as snakes her skirt, she was a deity who was dualistic in nature, being both respected and feared for her nurturing qualities that enable life and her ability to bring destruction upon that very same existence. She's represented here in this 15th or 16th century sculpture, unearthed at the site of Tenochtitlan, now in Mexico City, with features that indicate a morbidity associated with evil and the hellishness in Western belief systems. However, her symbolic features had, and continue to have, significantly distinct interpretations for the Mexica people and their descendants. Sveva has chosen to enhance the scale of Coatlicue in proportion to the figures, seemingly as a reminder to the natural power of creation and destruction that we're all bound to. The presence of Coatlicue at the gates of hell forebodes not only the traveller's sinister journey through human evil in the underworld, but also, in considering her dualistic nature, involved in both death and birth, offers a consideration on life cycles and the inescapability of death. End quote. This next painting bears the curious title of Triptych, which for anyone unaware of the word, is normally the word given to a display of 3 separate paintings presented alongside each other. However, in this painting, the word takes on a slightly different meaning from Sveva's perspective. Quote, "A place of the innocent suffering inflicted by loss, defeat, and disease. The fractured and darkened space depicted in this painting presents an image of these mental and physical trappings that nature subjects us to. Of the 3 forlorn figures being observed by the travellers in the foreground, disease, as represented by a figure of purple flame, is identified by Sveva as the fiercest enemy, while loss manifests in the far figure as a grim loneliness, a defeat, a crushing dejection. Interpreted by Sveva as a triptych, as there are 3 experiences being presented, the sense of an overwhelmed ability to persevere while suffering from these afflictions is starkly felt in the scene. There are multiple hallways leading away from a desolate amphitheatre, yet all figures remain, seemingly unable to consider future possibilities. Sveva would have seen these statues of suffering as universal experiences that she understood through her own struggles." End quote. This next painting, titled The Spoiler, or Aishma, gives us a brief insight into what Sveva's spiritual and moral beliefs were. Quote, "Aishma is the Zoroastrian demon of wrath, rage, and fury, the deity of this ancient Iranian religion who is considered the fiercest demon, bound in opposition to the forces of truth and obedience. It is believed that this deity influenced the development of Ashmodius or Ashmodai, the demon of lust, anger, and revenge of Jewish mythology, that was also subsequently absorbed by Christian legend. Through Aishma, Sveva considers the concept of hatred and the violence to which it leads, as she and her father's spirit encounter the spheres of human evil in hell. This hell that Sveva imagines is created and enacted by humans, in contrast to the supernatural administration of a Catholic hell, and includes 5 globes of sin that represent evil. Here are portrayed the unjust actions inflicted by humans upon other humans and animals, which Sveva believed to be the gravest types of sin. In this, it is the turning against compassion and empathy of other beings that Sveva regards as the most terrible for humanity." End quote. This next watercolour is up there with one of my personal favourites in this collection, titled From the Abyss. The abstract, monstrous presence that we're presented to in this is so compelling, and thankfully, we again have some information behind what this painting could represent. Quote, "Occupying the cave-like space in this painting are the depictions of the inner states of cruelty and envy, impulses that Sveva condemned to hell in her reimagining of Dante's Inferno. Cruelty is seen here as a gluttonous monster who feeds on the spirits of the powerless, while envy, unable to enact its own damage and thus dependent on cruelty, spits out venom and aches to see grief inflicted." Drawing from Christian teachings and her own philosophical perspective, Sveva developed a notion of hell and sin that was definitively her own. The grave sins in her speculation are violence, cruelty, including envy, indifference, lies, and betrayal. Sveva's pictorial notion of hell is void of supernatural punishments, and is instead represented as a land of sinful humans turned monstrous and inflicting suffering upon the innocent. In this, it is more reflective of a living hell on earth that these sinful acts give rise to, rather than being the traditional Christian hell, wherein the sinful are punished after death. End quote. In this painting, we're presented with a theme of indifference as a third impulse in Sveva's conception of the deadly sins. Quote, "King Mannequin presents a complex image pertaining to the empty justice of apathy, particularly when it relates to the suffering of others. Indifference has been portrayed in the form of a wooden mannequin, as it means for describing the hollow lack of humanity in an indifferent attitude, the mannequin having the appearance of a human, but lacking the empathy that binds one to humanity. A sense of the artist's sentiment towards the corrosive effects of its power is felt in the mannequin's status as king, who is supported behind an oppressive wall of towering buildings, some of which appear anthropomorphized and ominous. This work suggests the toxicity of apathy, and when combined with power, its insidious capability to suppress fairness and compassion." End quote. This particular painting mystified me when I first saw it. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what to make of the imagery and the strange title of Ramping Medusa that comes with it. I just didn't know how the imagery correlated with the title at all. But the Kaitani Center provides a fascinating information card with this painting to give us a better idea. Quote, "This vividly painted work renders the Greco-Roman mythical Gorgon Medusa. Medusa is portrayed as a hybrid monster, stinging others with deceitful words as they come out of her mouth, yet painted as a frail and unraveling form, suggesting the poisons and the groundless nature of lies." Medusa is likely considered a figure of deceit by Sveva, based upon the historical interpretation of her as a deceiver of Athena. According to the account of a Roman poet Ovid, Athena transformed Medusa into a monster when she discovered that Medusa had made love with Poseidon in her temple, thus desecrating it and betraying the goddess. This story, however, has undergone revived scrutiny in recent decades, with many scholars speculating that the more accurate interpretation of Ovid suggests that the Medusa had been raped, thereby drastically altering the narrative that portrays Medusa as a dangerous seducer and a monstrous emblem of female deception and trickery. End quote. The painting titled Vastudus offers us a glimpse of a final sin in Sveva's imagining of hell, with this mass of reds, oranges, and a membrane of bright green being a representation of the act of betrayal. Quote, "She believed this to be so ultimate an evil in her conception of sin, that the only image capable of portraying the immensity of this act was this galactic scene, inspired by a photo of a remote galaxy. This work comments on the betrayal of Jesus by Judas as an archetype of a sin presented by Dante as the deepest and worst one. The imagery in this painting brings to mind a visualization of the structure of Dante's Inferno, in that it presents an idea of concentric layering, which mirrors Dante's circles of hell that tend towards the inner circle of the ultimate sin wherein resides Lucifer. Sveva also considered the image to represent a mouth, and therefore the kiss of Judas." End quote. The painting titled Barrack for the Skies essentially serves as the ascent out of Sveva's hell, as a personal interpretation of a moment when, after emerging from hell, Dante and Virgil look towards the night sky and are struck by the heavenly brilliance of the stars. Quote, "Sveva imagines the sky marked with the constellations Canis Major, the Pleiades, Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Cygnus, and considers the figures that they represent: dog, nymph sisters, centaur, scorpion, and swan, as dancing amongst themselves. Central in the sky is a peacock-tailed figure of Barrack, or Barrack. Barrack is the part human, part steed creature of Islamic legend that carried the Prophet Muhammad to heaven. In her writing, Sveva relates Barrack to Pegasus, the winged horse of Greek mythology, and in doing so, suggests a similarity within the myths of these two distinct cultures, while highlighting the joint ability of these legends to inspire the human imagination. Drawing ideas, as always, from her father's deep interest in Islamic culture, Sveva here blends the mythologies of distantly related peoples, forming reconnections to shared histories, and suggesting a universality in human belief." End quote. Sveva takes another curious turn in her Recapitulation series with a painting titled The Tree Beneath the Root, offering us a short homage to Jewish beliefs, more specifically revolving around the theme of the Tree of Life within the mystic Jewish discipline Kabbalah, as represented by the spheres through which God is manifest in the world. However, as per Kabbalah beliefs, it is the uppermost sphere that is said to be nearest to God, from which all others flow downwards towards the sphere of manifestation. There's a little bit more to it than that, but for the purpose of this video, I just want to keep it brief. Though having said that, the imagery of the Tree of Life seems to pop up quite frequently in the art I've explored over the years, so who knows, I might do a video on it someday. Back to the painting in question though. To quote the Kaitani Center again, Sveva's interpretation of this concept intentionally reverses this order, placing God as the deepest root from which all life becomes, echoing the upwards growth of a plant kingdom. This is represented as the white light at the base of a root, working its way upwards through the other spheres before emanating at the surface through the tree. Portrayed at the core of the root are the artist's love companions, who had passed away and are connected to her, looking on them from above by a thin red trail of paint. As curiously minded and deep thinking as she was, Sveva imparted incredible creativity and skill to her interpretations of mythologies, religions, and ideas, often creating something of a new philosophy in itself." End quote. Much like the ramping Medusa painting, I was left mesmerised but admittedly somewhat baffled by the imagery and title of a painting called The Watchers at the Hinge. The Kaitani Center describes this painting in great detail though, as follows. Sveva described this work as an image of change, one in which both the separation of relationships and continental departures are greatly personal decisions despite the input of others. With the immense statues contributing to the sense of the figures being overpowered, the couple on the rifting earth are shadowed by the clacking outside world of those who judge or impose expectations upon them that the statues represent. The grand Louise Nevelson-inspired figures seem to represent the enormous task of pursuing only one out of many possible futures, for they stand as barriers, prepared to misguide those within their influence. Sveva depicts herself marching towards a fetus which symbolizes her own birth, relating that being born is the first loneliness we are all given to know, for love or no love, who else can be oneself? The resemblance of this work to Salvador Dali's archaeological reminiscence of Millet's Angelus is notable, although a direct influence remains unmentioned by Sveva. End quote. Almost completely unexpectedly, as we continue through this vast series of paintings, we are greeted by one by the simple title of Her, and an equally as simple or at least more limited colour palette, depicting an elegant woman with her back faced towards the viewer, as if she's a faint hallucination or some kind of mirage in the distance. Quote, "Her offers us a sensitive portrayal of the artist's mother, Ophelia, contained within a transparent vessel, a symbol of her self-imposed retreat and reclusion from the world. Depicted as a frail figure draped by a sheer wing-like cloak, Sveva draws a parallel between Ophelia and a moth whose wings are withered and unable to sustain flight. Honouring Ophelia's struggles with mental health, despite the suffering she inflicted upon Sveva, presents the nuanced and deeply devoted character of the relationship between the artist and her mother." End quote. Next, we're presented with the painting titled Their World, which, as the imagery and title might suggest, is again another representation of Sveva's parents, in an intoxicating, dreamlike setting. As quite beautifully put by Kaitani.org, quote, "There is a perceivable foreignness to be felt in observing a romantic relationship from beyond in its intimacies. A distance which intuitively holds the intrigue and imagination of outsiders. In this work, Sveva imagined how this distant world unique to her parents might look like by incorporating forms of a land which, she felt, gave visual substance to their respective ways of being. Her father, a dreamer, is accompanied by gentle sand dunes, and with them, an openness to change and the new, Informing the personality of her mother, an absolutist, are the rigid barriers of steep mountains, impossible to overcome. Together, however, as portrayed by the life-giving greens and blues at their feet, the extremes of their characters are balanced." End quote. This next painting, titled Villa Maragio, again explores in a poignant way the influence of Sveva's Italian ancestry and history. This villa we can see is meant to be a representation of a family villa in Rome, where Sveva once lived with her parents before the long, one-way journey to Vernon, Canada. This home was apparently one of the tallest buildings in the neighbourhood at the time, but due to the family moving away in 1921, it never quite finished completion. Though according to the Kaitani Centre, the top floor might suggest a rapidly escaping fantasy that reflects the minds of Sveva's father Leone and other left-leaning Italians at the time. More specifically, the rise of fascism, combined with the complicated personal affairs that deemed a precarious future for Rome, if not radically dangerous. Quote, "Villa Maragio is both the unreachable past and the impossible future. The dreams that vanished in their failure to reflect or command the actual." Sveva felt that the wave and spiked vertical shapes in the foreground of the painting reflected the patterns of a dreaming brain as recorded through EEG onto graphs. It also recalls the textural nature of tree bark. End quote. The City is a painting that presents us with a beautifully chaotic crowd of people, being overlooked by possibly Sveva and her father, like Dante and Virgil, overlooking hell or purgatory together. In this painting, Sveva is essentially, quote, "examining the tears of existence and defining the human experience in such a space, ranging from misery to pomp, the desolation and the continuity." The imagery in this work presents a large spectrum of suffering and pursuit, with the model of a city as a chaotic, condensed expression of such human struggles and achievements. With a denser concentration of figures and situations of higher stress depicted in the lower section of the work Sveva seems to be presenting, as well as an image of socio-economic hierarchy. The figures at the top section appear separated by not only clouds, but a literal split in the paper itself, effectively alluding to the perpetual nature of human drive to, at best, overcome struggles, and at worst, succeed at the expense of others. End quote. Arguably one of the more hard-hitting metaphorical chapters in Sveva's Recapitulation series is the painting titled Harbour of Sphinxes. Here we are given a representation of Sveva and her family's departure from Italy to Canada. It's interesting to note that this painting marks the end of Sveva's mother appearing within the rest of the series. The Kaitani Centre explains why. Quote, "Harbour with Sphinxes embodies connection to a homeland and the elusive riddle-like nature of making decisions and the unknown changes that follow them. Ophelia, the artist's mother, is seen staying behind while her partner and daughter leave the shores of Italy for new lands. Sveva felt that her mother never psychologically left Italy behind, and because of this, could not adapt to life in small-town Canada. The plentiful sphinxes in this work present a sense of the overwhelming nature of choice and change. The Grand Sphinx laying guard over the harbour represents Italy, with its towers crowning her head and her attention focused away from those leaving her lands. Sveva and Leone then begin their journey to purgatory on their way to River Styx, guided by the boatman, who is a symbol for the passing by of all things." End quote. This next piece of artwork within the Recapitulation series I just had to discuss, as I think it's really cool and fascinating. It's titled Makimono of the Ninth. This is actually composed of 6 different watercolours, placed together, which I've done manually for this video, in a display known as a hexaptic. When installed, the hexaptic measures about 20 feet in length. The flowing, vibrant abstract shapes display imagery inspired by Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. As I said earlier, sadly, unless I buy 1 or 2 very expensive books that are available, not all of these wonderful paintings come with that much information behind what they mean exactly. I can easily give my own interpretations like I normally do, but since these paintings are meant to tell something personal and specific from Sveva's life, and since I'm more of an art fan than a trained art critic, I'd hate to presume or speculate too much this time round. So instead, I'd like to offer you a quiet moment away from my chatting for a while to just enjoy a couple more of these paintings as if you're looking at them in a gallery, and hopefully allow you to ponder on your own theories behind these works. When the time finally came to reveal the Recapitulation series to the world, Sveva would at first struggle to find anyone who could accommodate 47 works of art in one exhibition, as the series told a story, with each chapter being as important as the last. It was preferable that they all be displayed together. The fateful day would come when Sveva would approach the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, or AFA, offering the entire Recapitulation series to the AFA collection in Edmonton, with an agreement that the AFA would store, frame, and preserve the series. Despite being a complete unknown to the art world at this time, her work was warmingly well received, later being exhibited nationally, eventually drawing attention from other curators, historians, and writers who wanted to know more about Sveva's life told through these mysterious paintings. Many agree that if it weren't for the care and preservation of the AFA, the Recapitulation works could have easily been separated and dispersed into obscurity. Sveva had finally achieved one of her biggest and most important life goals. She had not only finally expressed her creativity, but now she had preserved it for the whole world to enjoy and experience. And so, upon her death at the age of 76 on April 28, 1994, the AFA would continue their promise to nurture the series for a further 35 years, until the works were returned permanently to the care and collection of Sveva's namesake legacy, the Kaitani Cultural Centre Society. Sveva was buried beside her father, her mother, and Miss Jewel in the Kaitani family plot in Vernon. The story of Sveva Caetani's life and her artistic retelling of it has been described as Canada's best-kept secret. A fairy tale kind of story that has only emerged to the entire world in more recent times. But it should come to little surprise how much her art and her story has captured the imagination and hearts of so many people by now. Not just from her art or even her dramatic background, but from her willpower and determination alone to never forget or neglect her ambitions right up to the very end. Only a year after her death, a book was published which I seriously wanted a copy of, but yeah, we've already touched upon this, a book titled Sveva Caetani, Recapitulation in 1995, which provides a comprehensive view of her series in book form. Outside of this though, renowned writers would also be tremendously inspired by Sveva. Canadian poet Daphne Marlett would compile Sveva's poetry and prose in a book titled Reading Sveva. Another Canadian writer, Leisha Rosnow, completed a book titled Little Fortress. This book tells the story of a Kaitani family through the perspective of Miss Jewel, the close friend of Sveva's mother that I mentioned earlier, who would occasionally visit them both during their isolation. One thought that kept coming to mind when I was researching for this video is that the story of Sveva Caetani is so fascinating and full of twists and turns that it could easily be a movie. Already there's been a documentary film that was released for Miami's Women's Film Festival in 2005 titled Sveva Imprisoned by Jim Elderton. As of yet, only short clips from this film can be found online. Also, according to research, the book Little Fortress is potentially getting a movie deal, either presently or in the near future. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you found something inspiring within the story and amazing artwork of Sveva Caetani. If so, please be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you'd like to see more from me in the future. Before I go, it's that time again for Artist Corner. Here I quickly get to share some artwork sent to me by one of my viewers. And today's featured artist is, oddly enough, another Canadian artist named Craig General from Ontario, who specialises in creating these beautifully melancholic and dark atmospheres, as well as some exquisitely detailed pen drawings. Craig tells me his artwork centres around dreams, legends, dark themes and imagery. He also finds images in negative spaces, almost like a Rorschach test, but in everyday objects. He likes to focus on religious imagery and horror cultures. He believes the religious imagery is in response to having it, quote, forced on a person. I'd like to thank Craig for sending me his amazing artwork, and I urge you all to check out more of his art on Instagram or Facebook. Please follow the links I've left in the description below. Now if you're an artist watching and you want me to potentially give you and your work a plug, I'd love to hear from you. Please send me an email to blinddweller@gmail.com or feel free to message me on Instagram. Please also be sure to join the Blind Dwellers Art Club on Discord. And as always, a huge thank you and shout out to my top tier patrons and channel members. Molotale, Booty Magic, Dave MC, Calvin Kai, John Allen, The New Ongoing 24, Akaiza, Jose Luis Andonez, Fernando Achicaro, Large Fatty or Big Chad, Fruit Dookie, Charlie Sancheesy, Port Perea, Classy Chassis, Ken B, and Carol H. If you too would like a shout out or want to see my videos early, please consider hitting the join button or the link I left below to take you to my Patreon page. Any donations at all are hugely appreciated and help me keep these videos going. That's all for me today then, see you in the next one soon, keep being creative, and bye for now.